My name is Lars Christensen, and thank you so much for joining live stream number 102. Hope you're doing good, friends. It is December 11th. It's Monday. Hope you are ready for another good week. It's kind of got cold here in upstate New York. Got some snow last night. Today, we're going to talk about bodies versus components. It's a question I got. Obviously, we got a few people in here. Appreciate it, guys. There's a question I got that I think is important that we kind of like address. Now, if you're a CAD ninja out there, you're probably all good. Take the day off. But for everybody else, I understand if it is a little confusing understanding this whole components versus bodies and try to figure all that out. I don't blame anybody. It's not because it's you know, stupid in any way, but like if you're fairly new to Fusion or any CAD software, that whole thing becomes a little like, what? And especially if you've used another CAD software before Fusion, you might have seen how some other system does it. So, with all that, let's jump into Fusion and take a look at this. No sound. Is it only me? Ooh, you better hopefully have sound. The mic is on. It looks like I got sound on my end. Only you. Sound is working. Sorry, man. You're on your own. Okay, let's jump into to Fusion. So I just started out like completely from scratch. Reset the defaults because I just wanted to, you know, if you just kind of like starting out and this is like the first tutorial you're watching. So there's two things I do inside of Fusion right out of the box. One is I like to go down here to the grid and snaps and turn the layout grid off. And then the other thing I normally do is I go up here on this is called the view cube, right click here and change this to perspective with auto faces on. That's it. Okay. So with that, let's talk a little bit about bodies versus components and how it kind of like works inside of Fusion. Really just want to make sure that give you an opportunity to kind of like just understand this and feel comfortable with this. And you know what? If any questions, because I know that you all are working on your own, you're all working kind of like on your own projects. So whatever kind of like comes out of this, put it down in the comment area and maybe we follow up with another video. Okay, here we go. So inside of Fusion, I have just opened up a standard model. Just hit the X here, so we got a brand spanking new model. This area over here, going down here. Oh, we detected an unexpected outage. Oh, that's all good. So this is always interesting. So it looks like it's perfect that this is happening when I'm live. That it looks like we have detected an unexpected outage. Fusion is temporarily in offline mode. So this means that you will still save everything locally, and it will update when it comes back on. This should not work this should not happen when I'm live, man. Hey, okay, that's it. We can chat about that later on. So with that, got it. Back to the topic. So I call this my dashboard. This is you know. Kind of like when you're in your car, what we're having in front of you. There's two things I want to kind of like point out in this one. There's this dashboard right here, and then there is the history line down here in the bottom. Now, it is important that for some of you people, you might not see this history down here. You can turn that on and off. You can do it up in your preferences, but you can also turn it on and off live by right-clicking up here where it says unsaved, do or do not capture design history. If I say do not capture design history, it will give me a little warning, and you will see that that kind of like goes away. I recommend that you have that on. So capture design history down here. If you by mistake have turned it off, go to your preferences settings, and then under design, you can set it over here, okay? This is just important when we start talking about bodies, sketches, and things like that. Okay, So over here in our heads-up display, we have a document setting where we can control, units. That's actually something we haven't talked about yet. Named views. We're going to talk about that. So you can actually have kind of like different camera angles. And then the other thing we have in here is an origin. You can turn that on the light bulb. Kind of like gives us some planes to kind of draw on. Okay? Now, that's how we all are starting out. This is completely empty down here. That is what you have in your dashboard on this vehicle called Fusion 360. So, I'm going to start a sketch. I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to just pick a plane. I'm going to pick this plane right here. And let's hit C for circle and sketch up a 50 millimeter circle here. You see I hit enter. It turns black. I'm going to hit Q for press pull. And I am going to make it, let's make it also 50. Okay? So, when we created this here, you will actually see that a couple of things happened over here in our dashboard and also down here in the history line. So what happened? Well, over here we got now a bodies folder over here. This here you see on the screen right here is a body. You will also see that there is a sketch over here, a sketch folder that will contain our sketch. So these two folders will contain as many bodies as we have inside of this part file and as many sketches as we have inside of this part file over here. Now down at the bottom we have our history tree, and that is really all this is down here. You will see the sketch that is the same as this one, and we will see the extrusion that made a body. Now this here down here is just a history line of each step that we are creating. And that is one of the things that probably is important to specify, especially with Fusion, if you're coming from another type of CAD software, is that in Fusion, it is literally recording every single step in that history line. You don't really change that history, cannot really be modified as you maybe would sometimes think it would. And I'm going to give you an example on that in just 1 second, where there maybe could be some confusion with this. Now, so what we have here, when we created our pretty circle extrusion here, cylinder, see how I modeled it up the same way as a body icon? See how the body icon is kind of like a round cylinder? Is we got one body. Now, what we could do is if I right click and say move copy, and you will see that our object over here is set to body. So if I select this body and I say I want to create a copy of this and I drag it out here, hit OK, notice what just happened in our folder over here. It is now two bodies, right? So we can have multiple bodies together. That is perfectly okay. Now, normally when you're doing this, if you're starting out, you normally want to keep an eye on and really only ending up with one body in the end. So just keep that in mind. But we have now two bodies. These are each two bodies. Also notice down in the history line that our sketch to extrusion have now become a copy-pasted body. And then there was that move command that I did when I moved it over. So all that have been recorded down here in the history line. Now, if I right-click on this move, and let's go up and say Edit Feature, I get back to the move here. If I drag this one back and kind of like let them overlap each other, hit OK, you will see I still got two bodies. They are literally overlapping, physically overlapping each other, doing something that is not possible in real life. Now, we have a tool up here you should know about. It's calling Combine. It's under the Modify tab. You can actually combine two bodies. So if I go over here and click on these two, I select Join, and I hit OK, you will see that we just combined down here, combined the two bodies into one body. Okay? So that is kind of like how bodies work. Any extrusion you make, new extrusion you make, turns into a body. Now you can of course extrude different places. I could open up another sketch on that same plane, and I could sketch, you know, a rectangle over here, and I could extrude that out, right? And what do you think that's going to be? Well, that's going to be another body, right? So be aware of that. You can do this. You can make multiple bodies within one Fusion part file. Now, to get rid of a body, you can just click on it. You can hit delete on your keyboard, and that is gone. But notice that the sketch still lives in here. I didn't delete the sketch. I deleted just the body. The sketch, now sketch number 2, is still in here. So the sketch don't really get eaten up by a body. It's still two separate things. And the history tree is still kind of like recording every move in here. Now I can select it over here, hit delete on my keyboard, and now it is gone. So it's not like you can't delete it, but you can go in here and you can kind of like do this with these bodies. Does that make sense? So part files inside of Fusion contains bodies and sketches when we start modeling things up. Now let's start talking about components, because this is maybe then where suddenly you're like, okay, got this. Well, wait a minute. What was that whole thing with components? It's not that difficult, I think. Just, you know, just gotta, if I do a decent job, it will not be difficult. Now, components, well, it's pretty easy. The Fusion part file that we have been working in since we started out here is a component. If we look up at the top, you see how the body is a cylinder? I kind of like model up a cylinder. Look up here on the top, it has a square. This means that this is a component. What it means is that if I click on a new design, you will see that when I started out, I actually had that component up here and then those 3 folders. And then when we started sketching and creating bodies, well, then that kind of like expanded over here, and we kind of like got those folders as we created things. So a Fusion part file is by default, when it starts out, a component. So that should make it, you know, okay, hopefully, you know, we got that. Okay. Now, where does that come in when we are talking about something like joints? So if we go up here and we click on the joint folder up here to insert a joint, you will actually see that I get a warning that there are no components to assemble in this design. So joints will join 2 components, not 2 bodies, okay? So a component is kind of like, think about the component as like the part, aka the Fusion 360 part file. Inside that component lives a couple of things. Inside that component lives, well, the origin that was already in there. There lives the bodies, and there lives the sketches inside of the component. Now, when we start talking about joints, when we start kind of like putting 2 pieces together and maybe have some movement or something, then we need 2 components. Okay. Now, if you have ever worked with another type of CAD software like Inventor or like a SolidWorks, then you're used to, then you probably are fine up till this point. You're used to then opening up. It's Monday. Hang on a second. You're probably used to opening up any specific assembly file that you're now bringing these part files into to put them together. And that's a little old-fashioned in the regard that you don't really have to do that anymore. And we don't do that in the Fusion. We can create assemblies inside of Fusion, but we do it in the same file type as our standard part files do. So that's one of the differences if you're coming from another system. And the reason for that was that when Inventor started out, SOLIDWORKS started out like, you know, back in the 90s, they started out with just having a part file, just being able to make one part. And then when people started wanting to combining them and get the movements, the joints and stuff like that, they couldn't really write the code to do that. So they came up with this assembly file, another file type where you could put the parts into. Now in Fusion, we can do it a little bit different. We're doing it right inside of the same type of part files. Now I gotta show you something. I want to show you a couple of things, but I want to show you one thing that is important, is that yes, you can absolutely turn a body into its own component. Okay, you can absolutely do that. So if I go into this new file here, we had, let me just, actually let's just save this one, the first one. So save this one as part 1. So this was the one we created right now, where we just created our extrusion and we combined these two bodies. Let's go into a completely open file and kind of like do the same thing. Let's create a sketch, and let's go ahead and create, I'm just going to hit S key here for a center rectangle. And let's create a rectangle in here, like that. Q, let's make that one 50 millimeters too. Right, so now we kind of like got a component. Now, I did this as a part file, right? I just did a body and with the sketches, just like I did the circle before, the cylinder before. Now, you can absolutely turn this body into a component. If you right-click on a body, you can say create component from bodies, right-click on a body, create components from bodies, and you will see that I now get a component in here. Now, next to the, and when I do that, you will see up on the top, the icon have actually changed a little bit. Now it's not just a component anymore. Now it's like an assembly icon. The thing you need to be aware of here is that the history down here has not changed. If I go in and make this new component active, by hitting that little fish eye right there, you will see that the feature tree, there's not really anything in here. But if I click on the expanded out here, you will see that this one has a body folder. Now, it doesn't have a sketch folder. The sketch folder is still up here. And that was because it's still maintaining the order on how I did this, right? If we roll down, back down here, I started a sketch. I extruded it out. It's still just one part file, one body, one sketch. Then I said make a component, and then it made a component in here. So this can be maybe a little bit confusing if you ever see this kind of stuff. Now, I should maybe have said this a little bit earlier. When do you want to use component versus body? So let's just take one step back. Mainly, you want to use the bodies if you're just making one part. Just one part. I'm going to make this coffee cup. That's one part, right? There's no like moving components or things like that together. That would be just a body. I could model it all up in one body, in one part file, and I'm all done. Now, if I were going to make this one, right, where we suddenly have multiple parts. There's a plastic, glass canister, plastic handle. Now we suddenly have multiple components that all need to kind of like interact, right? Like we want to add some joints. That's why we want to do components. Many people will tell you that the best way, if you are going to model something up that moves, the best way to do that would be when you start up a new file, straight out of the box, is to actually, instead of start drawing up the first kind of part file, you should actually go in and kind of like create the components from scratch without having anything in there. So for example, you can see here, if I right click up here, I can create a new component. So if we go back and we look at my little French press here, there's probably 1, 2, 3, let's just say 6 or 7 different parts in this total French press. So what I could do was I could start out here and say new component and just create those 8 or how many different components that's going to be inside of this assembly. Again, each component in here, when you look inside of it, contains an origin, and if I make it active and I start sketching in here, like this, you will see that this first component now contains one body and the sketches. Okay, so that's kind of like the difference between bodies and components. Now, so the first example is shown here where I kind of like started sketching up a sketch. I extruded this one out, and we kind of like had that standard part file, but then I made the body a component. The reason some people are not in favor of that is that down here in the history tree, we kind of like have broken, we have a broken link. Well, not a broken link, but we have kind of like a weird little jump here. Because if we're going in and looking at that square, it really only right now contains the I became a body. So that's why this is called rule number 1 on the forum, where you actually go in and create the different components. Now, if this is a little confusing, if this became confusing, go back, rewatch it. If it's still confusing, take a shot, come back, rewatch it, and then I'm sure that you will get it. Now, the last thing I want to show you is I saved out part number 1, right? That one is actually sitting right here. I just saved this one out. Now, you can absolutely bring this file that is this part file that is a component, right? Let's see the components up there. We can absolutely bring that into another of these files if we want to. The only thing we have to do is we have to save one of them. So let's just save this one here. We just created all these components in. Hit save. And we can call this one our component 1, whatever. Save that. It just have to be saved. What we can do is we can right click over here in the data panel on our part, and we can say insert into current design. Now they ending up right on top of each other. Let me just move it over. So when I do that, you will now see that the first part we created has now been brought in here as its own component. Now you can see that these were called components. This is still called part. It has the part name, what we called it. But you can see the symbols are the same. You will see that there's a link. And that means that right now, this file here is actually not inside of this assembly. It's just kind of like referencing it, meaning it's looking right out on this file here. What means that if I try to make any changes to this model right now, I can't because it's linked. What means that if I set, for example, let me just right click here and say create a sketch and start sketching on it, I will actually run into a problem that I cannot if I do that, you see that it doesn't cut through this because it can't, because this one is actually not living in here. It's almost like it's almost like magic visualization glasses we have where we see this part in here. Now we could use joints and other things right now. That would be perfectly fine. If you want to make changes to this file, well, go back to the original one, and here I could throw a hole through it. Like this, save it. You'll see that this get a hole on it here. If we go back to the component, you'll see I get like a yellow warning. If I click on that, then you will see the hole actually came through there. Okay. Another thing that you can break this link. I can right click here and I can say break link, which means that now this is brought into this file. I can do whatever I want with it in here, but it's not going backwards to that original file we created. I feel like that was a lot of talk for trying to break this down, but I hope I did a decent job. You let me know. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Need your honesty for this. Again, just remember that a Fusion part file, when you fire it right up, is an actual component. Within that component lives the origin, any bodies you create, and any sketches. Now, if you want any kind of like assembly movement where you need multiple parts added together, then you need components, which means you need multiple kind of part files within, and turn that in where you can start adding the joints and kind of like putting it together. I hope this was useful. Good to be back. It is Monday. We're gonna try to make these live streams. Sorry about last week. I was busy with some other a new product coming out called Fusion Production. I was doing some videos for that website. That was why there was no live streams last week. Hope you're okay with that. We're gonna hammer and see if we can't do live streams up till Christmas. Tomorrow we're gonna talk about what's new, because they came out with a release last week that I didn't get to cover, so I'm gonna show you my favorite highlights with that. That's it, guys. Hope you're doing good. Hope you have an awesome Monday. Hope to see you tomorrow. I'm gonna do what I normally do in the broadcast. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much. I'll jump into the live stream chat and say hi to everybody. Take care, guys.